Hey, hello, friends and viewers and people on Facebook watching us live. Welcome. Really great to be back with all of you here for our 37th live kitchen table conversation here with the Men and Masculine Folks Network. Yeah, very glad to be back with all of you to have a very cool conversation that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now, basically since we scheduled it, with our two friends here, Hunter and David. Also just really glad to be back with my brothers Felix and Serrano, and for Peng and Ed and Roderick, who can't be with us here, where all of you are. We're just sending love, and we miss you. We always miss folks when they can't be with us. So thanks again for being here. And before we, really dig into what we're going to be talking about here, I'd love for my friends here to introduce themselves. Felix and Serrano, if you want to go for that right now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I work for Esperanza United, reporting from Eagan, Minnesota. Super excited to be here with all of you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Serrano Robinson. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am zooming in out of Duluth, and my Wi-Fi is spotty, so please let me know if I turn into a robot or if you can't hear anything that I'm saying. And I'm glad to be here as well.
A handsome robot, we'll let you know. Thanks, guys. Glad to be with you again. And yeah, before I open it up for David and Hunter, just thought it'd be great to just kind of share a little bit about what it is we're talking about here today. And as a reminder, for these live kitchen table conversations, our goal really is to be, through these conversations, shaping new meanings of masculinity that are authentic, caring, and thoughtful. That's sort of our overarching goal here with these conversations. And, for this conversation, we were really excited to think about talking more about our community leadership cohort, or Community Leadership Institute, which actually we started for the very first time last year, March of last year. And a little bit about that, the goal of this institute is really, it's geared towards young adult men and masculine people who are really looking to get more engaged within their community, who are wanting to learn more about social justice concepts and really how they can step more into their own leadership in order to create communities that are safe and caring and inclusive for all folks. And so this institute, the Community Leadership Institute, is a year-long capacity building cohort to help folks lead and organize within community to end gender-based violence, specifically through the frameworks of gender and queer analysis. And just some of the core values that we share, with this institute is that we are all connected, as number one, and that it is important for young adult men and masculine folks to have a role to play within communities to end violence, and that communities should be safe for all of us. So really kind of coming from that lens with the Institute, and just so grateful, that David and Hunter and some other folks were able to participate in that. So I will pause my talking here, and maybe we can start with David. Maybe just introduce yourself, and maybe just talk a little bit about how you heard about the Institute, or like what got your attention and made you reach out and apply and be a part of that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Sean. Hey, everyone. My name is David. I use him, his pronouns, and I am based in South Minneapolis. I was a member of the first Men and Masculine Folks Leadership Institute last year and stretching into this year. And to be honest, it was my first time participating in a men's group. I actually found out about the cohort on Twitter, of all places. I don't think that this group actually advertises too much on Twitter, so it might come as a little bit of a surprise to them. And my motivation, or my yeah, my motivation was kind of coming from the realization that like I haven't had these conversations with men and masc folks about how masculinity has affected, you know, my upbringing and my perspective on things, and realizing that, yeah, like to be able to have a space in a community for that was something that I desired. But, you know, you're always like kind of scared of trying to like put out feelers and starting it yourself. You know, I've talked to one of my friends recently and he's like tried, like just suggested having these conversations with his men friends, and like he honestly got laughed out of the room, and I'm like, yo, that sucks, you know. So to be able to have a space where you're like, hey, like this is happening, these are the intentions, you know, was really attractive to me. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from. What about you, Hunter?
Thanks, David. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hunter Beckstrom. I use he, him, and his pronouns. And like David, I'm coming to you all in this virtual space from Minneapolis here in Minnesota. And just a little bit about kind of my journey into the Community Leadership Institute is that I also work at an organization called the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and kind of having some partnerships with other organizations such as Men as Peacemakers up in Duluth, and just kind of hearing about some of the different events that obviously you all great people are hosting. And I know that since my role kind of working in the anti-violence movement, I've been doing some of this work since like 2015. And, you know, quite honestly, at times feeling kind of finding myself being the only or one of the very few men or masculine folks in these spaces, which for one isn't, that's not a bad thing, being surrounded by women and female identified people whatsoever. But I think it's really important for me as a individual and as a man in the anti-violence movement to connect with other men and masculine folks, because I think it's so having these spaces where men can be a bit more vulnerable and feel like they can really open up about previous experiences, and have that not only that support from, you know, our peers, but also kind of pushing ourselves a little bit. So giving that nudge to you know, work better, or take some more time to reflect on something that we might have done that was harmful in some way, right? So I think that can be very powerful. So just that was really my motivation for being a part of the Community Leadership Institute. And so certainly want to be able to take some of the practices that I've learned previously and how I was able to bring that into the Institute itself, but then also, of course, some of the things that I learned from my own peers, such as David and the other facilitators throughout the Institute, and how I can obviously continue utilizing a lot of those really helpful tools in all my future work too.
That's awesome. I love hearing that from both of you, you know, as one of the facilitators for the Institute. You know, doing this thing for the first time, it's like you don't really know how it's going to land. You don't know how it's going to go over, especially in COVID times where, you know, it's like we're doing this all virtual, and how's that going to land with folks? And also just like things like, when do guys have time? When will guys set aside the time to do something like this, right? So like, even, you know, this second cohort that's starting in March, you know, we switched up the timing a little bit to just see if there are more folks that we can reach, you know, in an evening time versus last year. I think it was like around a 1 o'clock time that we were meeting, which can be hard, you know, so like guys who are working during that time. And so just cool to hear more about your experiences, and Twitter. I'm surprised by that. But cool, you know, I love to see that and hear that like our stuff is getting out there, because I think it is really valuable. And I think what makes it valuable is the people who show up and who participate and who bring, you know, our stories and our own experiences, and who are willing to like share that in sort of that authentic way, Hunter, that you were mentioning. And yeah, so I guess I'm you know, curious, Felix and Serrano, if you have any thoughts. Felix, you know, you were involved with the Institute. Yeah, just wondering what's coming up for folks.
For me, listening to David and Hunter is took me back to when I started working in this field. I came from a, even working in a nonprofit, but I work mostly in housing, so foreclosure prevention, financial counseling, but finding a space where I was able to have this type of conversation, it totally changed my mind, my perspective, and for first time, I probably felt that I wasn't alone. Me, father of two daughters, I always realized that a lot of the behaviors that I had, they were really unhealthy, and I didn't want my daughters to, when she thought about a men or masculine folks, that they will thought about those type of behaviors or characteristic that they were very unhealthy, but they were so into the society and the expectations of us as men to be tough, to be strong. And I want my daughters to play with mud. I want my daughters to do things that make them feel themselves and not be strict to a gender role or expectation from the society. So listening to them, it just remind me also, my first time that I was with the group, but the Men and Masculine Folks Network, it opened my mind so much. So it provided me the tools now to change careers and also start working in the society and in my communities. Like Hunter said, a lot of the times we feel alone. We even, and we sometimes we don't have even the courage to step up because we know other men are gonna reject that because it's not expected by the society. So it is something that takes a lot of time to change and to earn the knowledge. I've been working for Esperanza United full time for 4 years, and there's so much to learn, and I don't think I know everything, but through these spaces I've been able to not just to learn from Sean, from Peng, but also from Hunter and David, open my mind and listen to other perspectives that are going to help me to become a better man, to become a better father, brother, etc. So yeah, I'm super proud of you too, because I can see your passion, see you guys like two amazing allies. And yeah, I want to hear also a little bit more from you guys, what you guys found helpful or from this institute. But I don't know if Serrano have any other questions before I jump in with this question. But yeah, I would love to hear what you found helpful from the institute. But I jump in, Serrano, if you want to say anything.
For sure, thank you. I'd say for me, it's more so like this appreciation of the work being done as well. Um, yeah, like I think it was a clear moment where I think both of you said like there was a realization. And thank you for clarifying the realization, Hunter, because we all know what we mean by it. But like the realization that you're only the one, or you're like few of many men in that room. And thank you for clarifying that it does not mean that we mean like we want less women. We mean like, oh, we are the more men. Like there needs to be more men to be a part of this conversation, to be a part of this movement. So I'm just more just grateful and also willing to actually would love to learn more too. But yeah, you just like you'll notice it's weird. I have like friends who are just like wondering like why do you live the way you, and it's like don't listen to me, follow me, you know. Um, like don't listen to, I've already answered those questions. You probably don't like the answers, right? Because it means like you got to go against what you've been brought up to and what you've learned and what you've like been taught. But it's like the things that we were taught are not our fault either, right? As bold as that just sounds, like things you were taught are not your fault. It's how you receive and how you use that information now. So you can unlearn that stuff that you were taught, and that's okay too. Like that's just what I'll be trying to like wanting to tell men. Like it's fine to unlearn. Like it does not make you a bad person or a hypocrite to be like, I once thought about this in this way, and by fucking God, this changed my entire perception, because it shows the fact that you changed, right? So I think there's a lot of men too who are just like in fear or just doesn't think that change exists. There's people in general, sadly, who don't think that change exists. But it's like, no, you like literally change exists because you can change your clothes, or you can change the way you think, you can change like your food habits. Like don't limit what it means to change something. I think we just get really scared when it means changing habits and old things that we're used to doing. But like Felix, much appreciation, and I would definitely love to hear more too.
I can jump off a little from what Serrano was saying, kind of like the idea of I feel like, I've been in spaces with other men and masculine folks where, I have really wanted to kind of open up about some topics and things like that. And I know, like, David, you had shared, like, you had one friend who shared that they did that and they got laughed out of the room. And I have been that person who got laughed out of the room, but I've also been the person like laughing at others, right? So I have made change in my life. And I think that's like very important about how we come to these conversations, knowing that, I've done harm, but certainly been able to try to repair some of that harm as well. But I think also just the idea of really trying to take away some of that apprehension, because I think a lot of men and masculine folks want to have these honest, open, difficult conversations, but they feel like that environment isn't right for them to open up about that, or they don't know how to reckon with some of the thoughts and feelings they might be experiencing. So all that to say, I think with some of the tools and exercises with the Leadership Institute, like just kind of being able to have some of the tools of knowing how to provide that open environment, and just some of those like facilitation skills. And no one has to be an expert on this. We just kind of want to like hear your ideas and thoughts and like share what your experience has been, right? And I think that can be one of the most like transformational pieces of all of this work, right? Because so often men and masculine folks don't have the opportunity to talk about these very important conversations. So if we can just begin there, that's like a very, very important first step.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that, because I was thinking about like I also have like that moment. Well, there have been many moments, but like, yeah, those realizations that like, actually, if I'm gonna like continue growing into the man that I want to be, it's gonna take work. It's gonna take some intentions. It's gonna be, making some time to gather with folks like this when these opportunities arise. And just for folks who are maybe wondering more about the Institute, like what is the setup of it? So I think I mentioned it is a year-long, free institute, I guess we'd say, or program, or however you want to say. And so the first 6 months, phase one, as I've been calling it, is like literally, we meet once a month. There are 6, virtual sessions where we meet in a Zoom, setup very similar to this without being live. And we just, get to know each other, and then we talk about some of these topics where really starting from, looking at the history of oppression within this country, who is most impacted by oppression and what does that look like. So a lot of educating, because a lot of those things are not things that were taught in schools. I remember looking at this timeline, which is a tool that we use for the first time at a retreat that Pang and some folks with the network put on, and just being floored by like, 85% of this information was totally new and I had no clue about, so starting with some of those pieces, like helping folks understand what the violence prevention movement has looked like over time as well. Like, how did it start? Who has been running things? Who's been leading the way? We also dig into things like, what are men's rights groups, and what's going on there, and how does the network sort of fit within that, because there are sort of all of these, manhood retreats where you can go out to the woods and build fires and, do trust falls, or like whatever those things are, right? But yeah, just looking at like how men have interpreted and viewed like the women's movement, the violence free movement, and then yeah, just talking about like, what does it look like for us to take care of ourselves, in a way where we're focusing on our own healing and then sharing that and building relationships with more men and masc folks. So that first 6 months, we have 6 meetings. There's some stuff, that folks can do in between. There's readings and extra things that we share along the way. And it's really up to each individual participant, how much they want to engage with that extra stuff. And so that's the first phase, first 6 months of this. Second phase is really guided by each participant, because that is when we're asking folks to put what they've learned into action within their own communities. So we, offer one-on-one training and coaching times with participants through that phase as they're sort of brainstorming and coming up with an idea, whether it's a one-time event that happens in their community or whether they're trying to establish a new group where guys are meeting and talking. So that sort of second phase is where we step back as facilitators and say, here, what are your ideas? What do you see? Like, where's the need in your community? And then how can we support you with some funding as well as that, coaching along the way? So definitely curious, to hear what y'all thought about sort of that first phase, like if there were things that felt really new, or like, what did that feel like to kind of go through that first sort of like learning part of the Institute?
I can start off and then I can hand it off to David. I think like right away it was really important to kind of establish some of the connections between all the participants. So we really tried to offer some ground rules that we would, create as a cohort together, and then obviously come back to if, we felt as a group needed that to happen. And then you all as facilitators really encouraged us to kind of meet one-on-one with each other outside of the cohort meetings itself. And I know that I was able to do that with some folks, and that was just nice to kind of connect more on that one-to-one level, because then, I think it helps kind of offer that openness as a larger group to, be honest about some of your previous experiences and kind of that idea of vulnerability. So I think that was very important. And as Sean was saying before, just some of those educational topics we went over, like just being so oblivious to some information that is so crucial as to how, whether it's how our systems are set up today to oppress different types of people, or, just as men, how we ourselves have been trained from the day that we're born to act a certain way and everything. So just kind of having that first knowledge and connection building through that first phase of 6 months, I think was absolutely important.
Yeah, thinking of the timeline activity that Sean had just mentioned, and how learning about a history of gender was very like similar to me, taking my first ethnic studies class like a couple of years ago, where you're like, oh, there's all this information that like I had not known, right? And then inevitably asking the question, okay, but like, what does this have to do with like masculinity and patriarchy today? And trying to weave those connections in, and I'm still like, obviously haven't figured all of it out, but understanding that like that is the landscape that we're all navigating through, and like it is the perspective at which we look at gender today.
Yeah, for me, it was really eye-opening, and at the same time, have the opportunity of have this conversation that you guys mentioned before, a conversation that we never had before, and see how even our cultures, me as a Latino, how that impact my community, that timeline. It was very eye-opening, and like you mentioned, also the realization that why we're not talking about it, why we hiding this when it's so important, especially for us that we're trying to create change and hopefully not make the same mistakes that we did in the past, just because even sometimes we think is this our fault. It's not our fault, and this is our chance for us to make a difference so future generations don't commit the same mistakes. And talking about that, I want to bring up what's going on now with Ukraine and Russia. Why in 2022 as human beings we're dealing with war, when we can sit all in a table and do it in a peaceful manner and taking care of each other, not using power and control to dominate, something that's very common when we talk about patriarchy and the systems of oppression. So we need to come with solutions that are, equal and, fair for everyone. So there's so much that we need to do. And through this institute, we want to not just invite, just white folks. We want to invite everyone in the community who's interested and want to be part or to learn more about it. I don't think we have the solution of patriarchy, but through this uh, meetings and through these conversations, we can start making a change and start creating direct impact in our circles, in our communities, and learning more of those things that sometimes we don't learn in school. So it is a great opportunity. I'll suggest people to don't be afraid. They want to learn more, contact us. I think this is a huge example of the institute and the type of folks that are getting together in these type of spaces. We all want to make a change. We don't have the solutions for everything, but together we can make a change. So the impact is huge, and yeah, very very happy of being part of this.
I think that something you shared too made me think, like, to specifically say, like, yeah, those of us who are involved with like running the institute are by no means experts on this material, nor do we think that we have all of the answers and the solutions. And I think it really is about like, like this first phase is learning focused, but it's like learning together. It's not like we're each in these silos where it's like we're viewing these things, we're learning these new things, and then we're just sort of left on our own to sort of like, yeah, how does this connect? How does what happened in the past actually continue to show up in my life, in my family, in my community? How are these like habits of power and domination continuing, and oftentimes in really subtle ways too? And so I think what I feel like the most important sort of powerful part of the Institute is like that ability to be together and to like wrestle with these hard questions and to be able to like sit with discomfort together and sort of learn how to do that, right? Because we don't like to do that. No one wants to feel uncomfortable. We don't want to think about how our ancestors may have caused all of this harm and violence and things. And yet, if we're being real and wanting to show up in healthy ways that like actually have positive impact in wherever we show up, right? Like we have to actually have those uncomfortable conversations, learn the uncomfortable truth and truths of history. And then, I feel like a lot of that time is also asking questions like, what is coming up for you as you're learning these things? Like, how is it actually making you feel in your body? And, trying to pay attention to some of these things that just aren't, they don't show up in like a lecture at like the college, it's yeah, just more organic and like meeting people where they're at and just trying to be real about, I didn't know half this stuff, and now what do I do with this new, this new information? How do I show up? What changes can I make? And then who do I have around me that I can reach out to and be like, this sucks, or I'm really struggling at this thing, or no one has time for me to talk about mental health as a guy, or whatever. Building these relationships has felt really, really important for me.
Like I just love like I love and honor like the conversations about just hearing that it's like very uncomfortable because it is, right? Like everything, like being even the first time, like it's weird to say like the first time like you're a kid again, but it's like the first time you had that realization, like, oh shit, I've been operating in a way that's like very harmful. Like it's very uncomfortable. It is. It's not easy, being that person in the group to be like, hey, what we talking about is actually bullshit. Like it's very harmful. Um, and I love that you talked about the uncomfortability, Sean, because like I had to get to a point in my life where like I feel like men should more think about what's more easier. What can I mend? Can I mend making myself uncomfortable versus making somebody else uncomfortable? Right? Because don't get me wrong, there's people in this world who like are bogus or like racist people, and you got to make them uncomfortable. But that's not the situation I'm talking about right now. I'm talking specifically about like male and masculinity. When I had to hit a point where I was like, damn, like me inheriting all the things that I learned as a kid was making women around me very uncomfortable, like very, you know, times of sexual times that was very uncomfortable, times to even talk about certain things, very uncomfortable. So I was just like, fuck, this is like harmful and uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for me. But I can actually at least mend my uncomfortability though, right? That at least makes more sense. I can't manage somebody else's comfortability. Sadly, sometimes it can even be mended. And I'm talking for the ones that go too far, sadly. But it's a reality, right? So I just love the fact you talk about like uncomfortability. It's like, yeah, like things are gonna be uncomfortable. Like, but what would you rather choose? Would you choose making yourself uncomfortable and you can at least fix that, or you can at least like go do your, self-care, your due diligence, learn and make yourself feel cool about it? Or do you, because we have a choice, like, do you have the choice to make other people uncomfortable? Right? Because I think about it in waves of like choices and not choices, and sometimes inherited, but it's like in the moment of choice, like you really got to ask yourself, like, is it easier to make myself uncomfortable and to get better, or is it easier to make others' life uncomfortable? Um, and I feel like we know the answer. We truly do. We just don't want to. Men, we just have a thing of not looking at ourselves. Let's just face that too, right? Other than looking in the mirror before we go out, we tend to not look at ourselves and the things that we do, or in ways of which that hurt other people. Um, Wait, just to stop. Y'all hear me clearly, right?
It was coming in and out a little bit there, but I was hearing most of it.
So this is what I'll do too. I'll just like kind of wrap things up basically, because that's what I've been doing. So for the premise, so I don't talk too long. What I was trying to say is every moment in life, most moments in life are going to be uncomfortable. Choose the one that's not going to hurt an entire community of people rather than choosing the one that's going to help you learn. So.
And something that's really good from these type of spaces is that the freedom of being yourself and without having the feeling that you're not gonna be feel respected, or open yourself all, being vulnerable and being around people that are gonna support you. And you don't need to be an expert to be in these spaces. I mean, you just need to have the willing to say, you know what, I want to learn a little bit more. I want to, I want to be surrounded people like them that gonna be people that are gonna hopefully get the best of me. They're gonna push me to do better and create safer communities. So I think that's something that encouraged me to do it every single day in my circles, and especially when I'm working with young boys, is just to encourage them to have this type of conversation, to challenge the norms, to challenge their families, and have these conversations to them, because it help to have healthier relationships, that not only between men but also with your partners, and feel more supported.
I'm, funnily enough, thinking about what it means to work through conflict, work through harm, work through hurt, because I'm moving and I need to like talking to folks who might become future roommates and being like, okay, like what is, your style of communication? How are you able to work through conflict? And realizing that like one of the things that is super important is to be able to have a commitment, A, build a relationship with someone, and B, like be able to have that relationship persist or remain committed to it through moments of conflict. And I think that, yeah, the Men and Masculine Folks Community Leadership Institute offers that, right? It's a space where we we'll work through the discomfort, like Sarana was saying, and like have a commitment to one another, right? Like you can opt out to leave, right? Like there's no reason that you have to stay in a relationship with anyone. But in this case, it's like we, because of this relation, because of the intentions that we're setting to, learn about masculinity and patriarchy and to build relationships and trust with one another, like, it's a safer, a more, I don't know what the right word is. It's a space where we're able to work these things out, a little bit better.
I think that also what you were saying, David, like resonates with me in the idea that not only with the Institute, but just this idea of like community connectedness, the importance of individuals connecting, but also how we know that we can't always rely on the systems in our world, our education systems, our criminal legal systems, because they can be very harmful, right? And so it's very important to be able to have that connection with your community because, sadly, we can't, again, always rely on those systems. So really making sure there's supports, just checking in with those people in your lives. It's a very key concept of this idea of connectedness between us as individuals too.
I love that. And I feel like it's sort of a great transition to think about like this sort of the second phase of what the Institute has been like for y'all, because, thinking about how we've talked about already in this conversation, there are so few spaces that are dedicated for men and masculine folks to come together in this healthy way, authentically. And so I would just love to hear more about, how you two have been thinking about the second phase of the Institute in terms of like, how are you working to like utilize some of these tools and skills and conversations and learnings, and what do y'all got planned for us? I'm excited to hear about that.
I can give a start to this and everything, and I know that we can talk about some of the challenges and everything too, of course. But I know that, since I work at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, I come from like a prevention background. And I think why it was so important to be able to try to mimic some of the tools from the Institute is not just to have this one-off training or event, just because obviously those kind of one-time presentations or trainings can be very powerful and influential for like kind of having this change in thinking, right? But we also, like, if we're preventing harm and violence, we really kind of want that needle to change, to shift to behavioral change, right? And so that's one of the things that Dave and I really wanted to do, was to kind of have a series rather than a single event, because thinking if we would just do a single event, not only would we likely not be able to have those connections be made between all of the participants, it would probably just be David and I speaking at people, and we don't want that to happen necessarily. We want that to be a conversation between all of us, and then to actually kind of hopefully see some of that change throughout a series of time. So I think, first of all, that was one of our main goals in trying to just kind of have a series happen in the first place. So I can stop there and let David kind of talk about some other points, and we can kind of flip-flop, I suppose.
I remember maybe the first couple phone calls and Zoom calls that Hunter and I were having about what we wanted to do for our project for the Institute. I was pretty much saying, hey, do you want to try to get randos, or do you want to get people that we know? I was like, do you want randos or not randos, right? And I think like we both settled on like, let's work within our existing networks, because like I was saying, it's about the relationship building, right? Like because we don't have, all the time in the world, and why not work with people who, we are already in relationship with, who we have already built trust with, who we are already hopefully in some way, shape, or form slightly accountable to, right? To be able to have these conversations. Like, this is something that I like haven't really been able to do with, like talk about masculinity with folks who are in my life outside of this Institute, like whether it's like men or non-binary folks or women. Yeah, it's like across the board. It's something that I feel like hasn't really happened for me. So why not start with the people that I know?
Yeah, and so those are a couple of the main concepts that we really tried to think about, in advance of trying to see what this event series was going to look like. And, we did initially have some pretty high hopes, since we had planned to do some activities in person with these folks and everything. So I know that, getting some feedback from like Sean and Felix, we were really like pretty pumped about doing like a series of 3 different events together. So like just kind of started off doing this like pretty masculine activity. So like rock climbing, or like, doing something that might be a little bit more comfortable for the people that we know who are men or masculine folks. Just to kind of start it off that way. And then kind of after we would do whatever that activity was, just kind of start having these connections. So we would encourage folks to, bring an object or bring a picture to kind of share how they would represent themselves in their own story, however they want to kind of identify that with the group. And then the second series, we would kind of focus on maybe something that would be a little bit more uncomfortable. So whether that was kind of like doing yoga as a group or something like that, right? So maybe, again, maybe not something a lot of men and masculine folks would feel comfortable with, but knowing that we really want to focus on this idea of being within our mind and body and focusing on healing at the same point too, right? And so hopefully just kind of building those connections more and more. And then that third and final event, we had this idea that through the funding from the Institute, we would actually be able to give some of those funds directly to the participants. And, based on, we would encourage the participants to have them create something what they thought represented positive masculinity. So if people wanted to buy like, painting supplies, and if they feel like they're artists in that way, or if they're really good at woodworking, they could buy some wood supplies and create whatever it might be. Or, if folks are feeling, that they have a lot of experience with computers and technology, create something in that way. So, making sure that we're providing that funding directly to those folks to then create something. And that third and final series being that people can kind of share, their journey through this, just 3 small event series, and the connections that they've made, the journey in which they started and where they're at now, and just this idea of positive masculinity. So of course we did have those high hopes, but we did want to kind of be aware of safety for folks. So we've kind of taken that back to a virtual platform and everything. So Felix had actually mentioned a Gather Town, I think is what it's called. So just another kind of virtual platform where we can all engage and still have a lot of these same conversations. And we're still going to make sure to have some of that funding be directly towards those participants to then kind of create this tangible piece at the end of our time together. And I think that idea in and of itself is really cool, just because it allows people to reflect individually on how that might have changed for them, for their idea of masculinity, because we want to ask that right away and hopefully kind of see that change throughout. But yeah, I'll let David kind of, fill in some of the other areas that I maybe didn't talk about.
Well, you pretty much covered everything. I think like the fill-ins are just like the kind of the process. I remember us also chatting about like, oh, like, what do we want to talk about, right? We're going to talk about gender-based violence. Are we going to talk about feelings, right? Are we going to talk about this need to hoard power and control? Like, what are we even going to talk about? And then realizing that, like, hey, like, we don't really need to decide that, right? Like, there's this Adrienne Marie Brown quote where she says, like, there's a conversation, like, in the room that only the people in that room at that moment can have. So, like, find that. So realizing that, like, hey, like, until we like know who wants to participate and what they want to share and bring to the table with that group of folks in that moment, like, we don't really need to track that much. So like, yeah, like Hunter is saying, I think like the end goal was like, oh, let's have this project about like what healthy masculinity or positive masculinity that's, you know, somehow, you know, disconnected from patriarchy might look like. But if we end up going in a different direction because everybody wants to do something else, like, so be it, right?
I think also just kind of jumping off that general idea was that, you know, we wanted to acknowledge that people might not be readily prepared or wanting to kind of disclose some information. So we were just going to like share whether it's a Google Jamboard where people could kind of post questions or answers anonymously, just really trying to meet people where they're at. Because I know that, you know, for some of the folks that I have really tried to encourage to be a part of our series, you know, might certainly feel that way. You know, they're interested enough to be a part of this, but they're very hesitant in that space, right? So again, just trying to meet those folks where they're at. And again, like focusing on the positives of that experience itself. We're not trying to shame anyone whatsoever. We're not trying to kind of distance ourselves. We really want to make that a positive experience and that connection between folks. That's really the, you know, the goal of our series.
I love that. I'm pumped. I was just thinking, I want to go. Yeah, so that was my sort of my next question is like, yeah, what's the timeline like? Like, have these things already happened? Are there ways that folks can connect with you? You know, if they're interested in being involved in the series that you're doing?
So we're actually starting next week, Wednesday, I believe. So we're holding it in the evenings for like an hour and a half. Again, it's all on a virtual platform and everything. And so it'll be 3 Wednesdays in throughout March. So the 2nd, 16th, and 30th, I believe, if that's correct. Just to like allow some space because, you know, we know people's capacity is super thin. People are really busy. But then also just to offer some of that time to reflect in between some of our meetings and everything. And, you know, Dave and I can, you know, check in as much as possible. And I know that we have a good amount of folks. And again, how David was saying that, you know, we're trying to work out with some of our current networks to see if folks are interested in the first place. So I suppose we are keeping a little bit smaller, but I know as we're talking about with these institutes, like, we don't want to just stop having these conversations after the event or whatever finishes, right? Like we want to make sure this continues happening. So whether that can be brought into larger audiences or just continued on with the folks who are part of it already, that would be awesome. So hopefully this can just be like a small start. And then, you know, whether we kind of continue connecting with the institutes or other organizations, like I'm pretty pumped to see where it goes in the first place.
I think this is a big example of the impact of what this type of institute can make as individuals and as a community, and that desire to continue meeting after this commitment, you could call them that way, because like I mentioned before, we need to be surrounded, and I can't wait till, you know, this pandemic ends so we can probably all get together in a park in Minneapolis, or, you know, and be able to be, you know, face to face and talk and grill hot dogs or burgers with men that really have a desire to, you know, to make a change, because we need spaces like that so we continue and keep fostering healthy relationships with each other. And yeah, and pushing other organizations also to continue to do the same. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done, but hopefully this could put that seed so other organizations could be inspired and continue fostering this type of events and relationships.
Yeah, thinking about that, I like recently participated in a session through this group called Asian American Justice and Innovation Lab talking about masculinity, and there were maybe like 10-ish of us, like me, another cis man, and the rest were like women, femmes, and non-binary folks. And at the end, they're like, "Oh, like, we're so glad you and Tony were able to join us. We're not often able to have conversations about masculinity with cis men." And I'm like, what the fuck? You're having conversations about masculinity without cis men? And we're not having those conversations like ourselves? Like we got some work to do, right?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's been said multiple times by both, David and Hunter and all of us here, I think on this call is like it's not just a one-off, right? It's not a like show up and learn all the things and now you're better. Like if there were, it makes me think of like commercials way back in the day where it was like the easy button and like the brain surgeon goes in and he's like, I could do the surgery, I could push the easy button. I don't even know what that was for, but I think so often we, especially as men, especially as masculine people with all of the privileges that we hold in this society, it's just, I don't know, I think people can either go like the route of, well, I'm going to show up and then I'm good and everything's cool and I'm going to go my way, or I'm going to show up and really invest in this and like continue having conversations. And the image in my mind that came up is like sort of just ripples, like each conversation that we've had here, here on the Kitchen Table Conversation series within the Institute, and these conversations that you two are fostering, within your own communities and those people that you're connected to, like that's how this happens. That's how change is made. And I think, I don't know, it just like fills me with hope because, we all have those days where we're just like, man, this feels like more work I need to do, or like, I don't want to learn about all this male privilege that I hold because then I'm going to have to like do a bunch more work. And, and so I think it's just really easy to get in that space where it's like, it's too hard. It's not worth it. But then like sort of, if you can pull back and see this bigger view of like, okay, well, who is that hurting like around me? That's hurting my family, that's hurting my wife, my kids, my friends, when we sort of just stay in that place and let all that privilege just continue like propelling us forward in this society where it leaves so many people behind too, people that we love and care about, right, that should be coming with us, that we want to come with us. And so I know, we're coming to the end of our time here today, but I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I feel elevated just thinking about like these three conversations that y'all, or these gatherings, that y'all are putting together and like creating a space where these folks can come together. Like you said, David, like there are not that many times when we can talk about masculinity, where we can actually be real with people, and it needs to happen so much more. And we need men and masculine folks showing up in the rooms and not being the one or two people. We need groups of us, so that way we can like sort of leverage some of this power. We can be like learning and growing together and holding each other accountable too for like the moments where it's like, Felix caught me on this thing and told me about it later, and it's like, oh crap, thank you for telling me that. Like I just said that to a friend, like I want to know those things so that I can do better and so that I'm not continuing to harm people unintentionally. So I'm just curious, what folks last thoughts on, Felix and Serrano, if you want to share, and then David and Hunter, I'll let you kind of just share what have we missed, what feels really important to say in the last couple of minutes. I'll leave that up to y'all.
I have a brief question for Hunter and David. I don't know if it's a question, but I know there's this second cohort coming. So if you could invite, other men or other masculine folks, what you could tell them in order to get them excited to participate in this cohort, and why it was relevant to you, why it's important to be part of this movement of gender-based violence prevention.
Again, I think for me, it like just goes back to creating a sense of community with, men and masculine folks in my own life and my career as well. I think that's very important for me as an individual, but kind of maybe wrapping up a little bit to what my final thought was that Sean was talking about is this idea of, I think oftentimes like when we're trying to get buy-in from like men or masculine folks who like don't want to be a part of these conversations, right? I think they some of those folks might automatically assume like we're just trying to bash on men and masculinity, but I think the important thing is that, you know, there's so many amazing things about being a man, right? And we want to uplift and elevate those things, right? Because like we can create men and the ideas of masculinity to be very positive, right? And so it shouldn't just be like, we don't always just want to focus on how shitty the systems are, or how, you know, traditional gender norms are so harmful and everything, right? So really knowing that we're trying to focus on the joys of these connections between men and masculine folks, and really being able to, you know, be in community together. I think to me, that's like my kind of wrap up thought, but also why it's so important for other people to be able to be invested in these spaces, right? Because that joy, that connection, you know, being able to just share what your own lived experiences are can be really invigorating and healing for your own self, and then for your community as well.
Yeah, I think to kind of add on to what Sean was saying in terms of like, oh, like, you know, your family and loved ones are being left behind. I think about how, you know, dominant narratives of masculinity are very similar to white supremacy, right? Like, I think like we have to come to the understanding of how white supremacy hurts white folks, right? And how our traditional forms of masculinity hurt men and mask folks, right? And the question becomes, right, I think for me, that I'm definitely still trying to grapple with is like, okay, if that is the case, then what else is there out there, right? And being able to unpack that and being able to explore that in a space, both in terms of like time and energy with Hunter and Sean and Felix and Ping and everyone else, has been really valuable for me.
Dang. I feel really grateful for this conversation. I'll just throw that out there. I also want to just lift up Serrano if you had any last thoughts or anything to share too. Just throw that in there.
For sure. I think the over of which, or the energy I got, which is great energy from this conversation, it's kind of like a two-part of like how I'm feeling. So the first part is that the space that in which men and masculine folks can change and authentically go back and relearn and unlearn the things that are very like unhealthy. Also, we have to create that thing that's called the space for men and masculine folks to do exactly the thing I do. Because it doesn't exist, at least not everywhere. So that's why I'm left with. It's like a two-part of when the room is open, when the doors are closed, it's tough. It's a great conversation, but there has to be a room. There has to be a door. There has to be a building. So that's what I'm left with. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it takes people too to open those doors and to create the spaces. And so I'm like I said, I'm already, yeah, pumped to just hear how things go for you, David and Hunter, and for these conversations that you're bringing to your folks, you know, that you have seen the value in having. And yeah, I'm just like, we need to have y'all come back maybe in a month or two, and sort of share about like how did that go? What was it like? You know, like what's happening now? Are the conversations continuing? Because I think it's, you know, we have a lot of power and able to create spaces and to continue conversations and to keep growing together. And we're always going to be doing that. So yeah, just very grateful for this conversation. Thank you to Hunter and David for coming on and just sharing like what the Institute was like for you and how things have changed and shifted for you, like within your own definitions of manhood, and like really lifting up the facts that those things are not concrete, like they are shifting, they are evolving, and we actually have power to like make that happen within each of our individual lives, and then coming together in these collective conversations, like we're doing it together, like this is happening. And I think that there are a lot of men and masculine folks out there who want to find those spaces. And so I think, you know, it's like whatever that movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. I really do think that that's that's what we're going to see here as we create more of these spaces and ways of sharing authentically. So thanks again, guys, for being here. Just really glad to know both of you and to have met both of you through the Institute. And if you are someone who's interested in applying or learning more about our second cohort of the Community Leadership Institute, we would love to have you do that. You can find more information on our website, and I'll link all of this stuff down in the comments as well. But you can head over to www.menaspeacemakersorg/MMFN. That will connect you with all the details for the Institute, where you can also apply, and those applications are open until March 6th. So you still got a couple weeks here to get those applications in, and we would love to connect with you in that second cohort. So thanks again for all the folks who tuned in, who joined our conversation today, our 37th live kitchen table conversation here with the Men and Masculine Folks Network. We also want to say a big thank you to our funding partners, who are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, as well as the Novo Foundation, for all of their support and partnership in continuing these conversations that we're having together. And as a reminder, our next conversation will be 2 weeks from today on Thursday, March 10th at noon Central Standard Time, live right here on our Facebook page. So don't forget to like our page before you click to the next thing on the news feed. You can find us on YouTube and subscribe and follow and set up notifications so you know every time we have a conversation come out. And again, we're just really grateful to be in community with each of you, Peng, Roderick, Ed, all of the folks who are connected to the network. We're grateful for and always looking to build that bigger. So if you're interested in getting involved with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, you can connect with us on Facebook, through the website. And everybody, take care for the next 2 weeks. We'll be back live with you then.